Well, I'm kind of surprised that someone say you've made it because, you know, I guess in the fashion that I'm able to do what I want to do, I think that's making it. And I don't think that is based on a period of time. I think that if you're able to create your art, then you're successful. Whether or not you're financially solvent or not is perhaps a different question, but I think if you're doing what you love and where your inspiration is, that's my definition of making it.
Well, I guess I interpreted this question a lot like David, I would say, in that I thought about it in like how do we define success as artists, and I think that would be different for everybody, but for me, I think about it as long as like I'm contributing to like a greater dialogue about art and the role of contemporary art or personally like non-commercial contemporary work in our community. As long as I'm participating in that conversation in some way, whether it's through production of art or exhibiting, reading, writing, or this forum is like a really great example of how like everyone here is contributing to that dialogue and in a sense making it. We're all making it. Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. Just that 30 years ago, I moved to Toronto to become a commercial photographer, and for me then, making it was to be one of those $3,000 a day photographers, and that was the goal. I ended up working in the studio system, so doing a lot of commercial photography, and what I found is the best photographers were in those systems. They weren't the ones out making $3,000 a day. The ones that were making $3,000 a day were PR people. If they were good with people, if they could schmooze, then they were bringing the money in. We ended up doing a lot of photography that those photographers couldn't do because they didn't have the skills, but they had skills to do it. So everything changed for me then. And that's when I started to really find art and know that there had to be more than just that as being a goal, as making it. So I agree with these two. David mentioned it first. It's being able to do every day what you want to do, and that is making it. Be nice to have the money. That would really be making it, okay? And then there's obviously the cover of the Rolling Stone, but we won't worry about that. But it would be nice if I don't expect to be famous before I die. I never ever thought I would be. I know I'm going to be when I am dead, and I know it's going to happen, and some people are going to be really lucky, and others aren't. But that's, so, you know, making it is success, and the success is just doing what you do every day and loving it and learning, and that's it.
So to build on what everyone has offered, I would say for me, how I've felt the most successful or felt the most like I'm making it or making a difference in my community is by being able to answer the call. Like say when somebody approaches me and says, we need somebody to give a workshop to people that are at risk in this population, and I'm able to free up enough time from my production schedule to say, okay, I'll be there and do that. And then I'm able to not only just profit for myself, but also for my community. My ability to be present in my practice as well as in my community. I think I can't progress in good conscience without giving back as much as I receive. And as an artist, I mean, I receive all sorts of support because people look at my work and really like it, or they don't, and then I give other people the opportunity to be in that position as well. So I feel as though I've made it because I can have the time to do that.
these are like probably the, you know, that I get the advantage of basically saying, yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I guess I'll say that the one thing that is sometimes challenging to resolve in a question like this, and partially it's also because I see a lot of the students that I teach kind of having the same thing, and it's sort of like artists have a really great way of being quite restless with themselves and with what they're doing and the world around them. And I think to an extent that making it looks like being able to be restless in a way that that other people kind of like accommodate or something, like, if that makes sense. Because there's ways to be restless that can kind of throw things or confuse people, and then there's ways to do it that I think are kind of generative. And I think that the ability to be generative with that restlessness, and that generative word is kind of termed against the things that you are interested in and not other people, that would be my definition of making it. And so day to day, sometimes you've more or less made it, I guess. So I think a couple of, maybe just a couple of general notes on it, and then I'll pass it on. But when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was working with a couple of artists, Noel Harding, who passed away earlier this year, and Rod Strickland, on a project called the Green Corridor in Windsor, Ontario. And we, as their kind of project assistant, I basically would go to meetings that they were having with like city officials and engineers and, you know, the dean of the faculty and stuff. And I was like, oh, this doesn't look like art that I thought, this doesn't look like art that I thought I knew. But it opened up, I think, this part of my brain that was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, I understand through talking with people, and I think I kind of like produce social dynamics by being with other people. And so that kind of did something, and it was really specific to being in a place that you had to negotiate the networks that you did or didn't have, and you were constantly, you know, kind of understanding what it meant to be with other people around a, you know, common concern or a question. And so kind of simultaneously, the lucky thing for me was that there was a larger kind of dialogue around socially engaged art, kind of like cropping up in the earlier 2000s. And so that kind of momentum was timed right with the work I was doing that made it actually really interesting to be working in a place that, you know, was not Toronto in Ontario, for example, right? And I think that had I been doing that work, you know, a decade earlier, I don't know if it would have been the same thing, but I'm really happy that this is kind of now more part of the dominant discourse of making place-specific and site-based and site-context work. So yeah, and I think that wherever that is a good place to work it.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is that as an artist making things that are specific to a place, is that you're responding to a need or to a demand.
Yeah, I mean, whether the response, let's say that is, yes.
Okay.
I don't want to derail you if you're gonna.
Oh no, I just don't want to, I don't want to over summarize what you're saying, so.
Okay.
You just want to know if you should agree with them or not.
I was wondering if we're talking
What
about
he
the same
said.
thing,
Right.
if we're building, so.
Yeah, okay.
So part of what I do that's specific to New Brunswick is that I work with community groups that are established with particular issues that are very important to our region. And I also make my work inspired by the work that I do there. And so I'm of two minds as a person who makes things in response to social need, because I still have to make money and make a living. So I'm constantly making new lines of work to avoid things like market saturation, because I'm in a small community. But I'm also constantly being inspired by the groups that I work with, because they are constantly changing, even though their needs are constantly changing, even though the situation in New Brunswick tends to be a little bit stagnant. I'm speaking about early childhood literacy in particular, and women at risk who are in the criminal system as well. So for me, working in this place means responding to those needs, being inspired by them, and working on those issues directly, but also translating that into my work.
This is a tough one for me, actually. I'm quite selfish in terms of, I try to give back to the community, but I don't work with the community when I'm making my art. My art is it's not well, it's all personal, but internal. Yeah, it's a quiet place for me when I'm doing it, and but what it has allowed is 2 years ago we moved upriver to Woodstock, and so I've been doing we've been trying to engage that area and upriver from there to come together and this cultural corridor kind of thing happening. And so we've been working on that, and which is independent from the art part. It's more administrative, I guess, kind of thing at this point. And so we're doing, a little bit of that. I'm doing, did the background for the Dooryard Arts Festival for the main stage last year, which is, new for me. I've done event decor and things like that before, but so I did, that type of thing. I've done some, built some plinths for the library, and so giving back that way. And now these are, some paid, some not, it's all a big variety. And so in terms of the way you guys are talking with more of the interacting with the public that way, I haven't had the opportunity, I guess, to do that so much. The only real interaction I've had is in that way would be with, there's a gallery, Creek Village Gallery, that started a couple of years ago in Woodstock, and I joined them when they were starting up, and I had no idea what direction they would sort of go in or whatever, and the direction they did go in was more of a catering to tourists, and which is a gallery that you need in that environment, and but it doesn't suit my work and my price point. So I'm still represented in there, but that's a small part of it. But I do see a way that that gallery can be used to promote and maybe help a different gallery survive in the same area, because you do need the other one to go with the other one. And so I'm hoping to pursue that a little bit more and see if we can get something happening that way. So that's really all I have there, I guess.
Yes, it does affect my work. I actually didn't know that I was going to end up moving back to St. John, which is where I'm from and where I work. When I graduated from art school, I briefly moved to Halifax and then did some work in BC and decided that I wanted to move to Tofino and become a surfer and / artist. And surfing's really hard. And it's rains all the time. So it didn't work out. I cried a lot and decided to come home. But anyway, I was actually pretty happy with the work that I was making out there. In retrospect, it was really honest and emotional. Anyway, I guess I got off track, but I did decide to move back to New Brunswick, and I thought it was going to be just a in-between place while I decided where I wanted to go, what big city I was going to move to, Montreal or Halifax. I didn't know. And next thing I knew, I was renting an apartment, and I met some friends in St. John who I actually didn't know my first time living there, growing up there, and got involved in a studio, and very quickly got involved with Third Space Gallery, and I haven't left. And that was 5 years ago now. So it's affected the way that it has affected my work, in that I've sort of absorbed and taken on the do-it-yourself ethos that I think is really strong in New Brunswick, and not just in the art sector. I think that it happens in a lot of occupations and lifestyles, and so that has found its way into my artwork, and as well responding to the place that is New Brunswick with site-specific work, and I think that's pretty much all I had to say about that. Thank you.
I moved to Toronto to study violin, and I received my education there. And I think it was literally 2 days after my last day of school, something went off. An alarm went off. I'm sitting by the phone, and I don't know what to do. Because they don't teach you what to do in university. At least they didn't in those days. I knew how to play the violin, but that was pretty much it. At the disappointment of my teacher, I did an audition for an orchestra because they paid money, and I won the job. So basically, that could have been the end of what I could still be in that orchestra and earning a reasonable salary and playing as so many musicians, classical musicians do. Coming to New Brunswick was a choice that I made with my wife at the time, and quite literally I didn't know where St. John, New Brunswick was. I grew up in Winnipeg, got as far east as Toronto, and I knew Halifax was out here somewhere in Newfoundland, and was that where I was going? But we got a map in Montreal and figured it out. I'm not making that up. We stopped in Montreal and tried to work a little bit of French to get a map, and that's how we got here. So I was in a market that had an enormous amount of infrastructure for people like me, classical music, and you could sit there and wait for the phone to ring and earn a decent living. New Brunswick was nothing like that. There was no infrastructure for that. If you sat by your phone, you'd be a skeleton in a month. It just would not ring. There's nothing here. So it forced me to become an entrepreneur in what I did, and I think that's the biggest difference. And I'm extremely grateful for that ability to be able to be an entrepreneur, because it teaches you business skills, it teaches you people skills, and it's been extremely valuable in all aspects of my life, not just my career. And it also allows you to think not just about yourself, but for others. So I did become very involved with volunteering with organizations, and thinking that in some small fashion, my experience would help them, but the things that I learned from the people in these organizations and how they operated was really a tremendous experience for me. Really many very, very brilliant people in these organizations that I volunteer for taught me more than I could ever learn at a university. Sorry, I know you're sensitive to that sort of stuff, but being a university prof and all, but so that's the biggest difference in my experience here, is that the wealth of knowledge that I continue to be able to acquire literally comes from all the people that I collaborate with. Okay, well, I think just to continue on with what I was saying about developing skills here, because the infrastructure doesn't provide it for you. So about 20 years ago, I was coaching the youth orchestra at that time, which is an extremely important educational tool for anywhere, but went to their AGM, and they were talking about closing the doors because of lack of finances. And at the time, I couldn't conceive of a whole province or even a community not having that. It's like taking high school out as far as I was concerned. You just wouldn't do it. You couldn't think of it. And so I put up my hand, simple fiddler, I had no idea, and said that I would try to help. And I remember asking for my first donation. It was the Jim Crosby. And made an appointment, went to his office, and was shaking like a leaf because I've never asked anyone for money, and I asked him for money, and he said, well, if I give you $500, will you get out of my office? And I said, yes, I would. So that was my experience. I had no skills to do that, but that year I did raise $30,000 for the orchestra, and it remained open, and it's quite a success today, as many of you may know. But I can tell you that being forced to have that skill was very uncomfortable for me, but actually very rewarding at the end of the day. So I just wanted to continue on. And what was the second part of the question?
What is the best tool that you've ever invested in for your professional life?
And I mentioned this earlier too. My greatest education is collaborating and being on boards and just witnessing how people do things and learning from them. And I've had great mentors here, and that if there's one thing that I could recommend people to do is to seek out people who are really smart and learn from them. Many are in the room here.
I'm going to answer this question just based on my experience with Third Space Gallery in like the administrative role of a not-for-profit arts organization. And I would say like the biggest barrier to professional success or for professional artists has been really trying to sort of demystify the role of the artist, and that primarily has happened when trying to seek out grants or funding from agencies that aren't like primarily arts-based, and so trying to explain or talk about the fact that an artist isn't only like a solitary, like the artist profession isn't just, being solitary in the studio, creating work, which then is eventually exhibited in a gallery space, like whether it's for commercial purposes or not, but that, investing in an arts organization into infrastructure just helps build capacity so that, in turn, like so many more people benefit from investing into an arts organization. And Justin talked about like the role of the artist a lot in his presentation. And so thus far, I think the biggest barrier is trying to share the wide like breadth of occupations that an artist can have in what they do. And the greatest tool for me was definitely, I think, purchasing membership to an artist-run center, maybe multiple artist-run centers, and just being part of a community, whether it be big or small, and having the opportunity to then like sit as a jury member for selections when artist-run centers are picking which projects that they're going to exhibit, and just having that experience and really opening myself up to learning more about what other artists are doing across the country and beyond.
I'm my biggest problem with success, I think, in terms of, and I'm not going to speak for all artists, but it's finding a way to promote myself and get my work out there. And I'm horrible at it, and I've known that forever. And as bad as I am at it, and how long I've known it, I haven't done anything about it. And so anybody who wants to talk to me about it, then let's talk. But, you know, it really is. And so that's the biggest one I see. And the favorite tool, I'd like to divide that a little bit. There's one that came along that was very important. Wasn't mine personally. But when I was talking before about being in Toronto doing commercial photography, and the studio I worked in had the first digital camera in Canada, and we tested the first two, and the biggest moment I remember is when our Mac went from 2 megabytes of RAM to 4, and we were so excited, and that was that. My favorite tool is an Olfa knife, and it's come in so helpful everywhere. So,
Is an Olfa knife like a Swiss Army knife?
it's like a utility knife,
Ah,
box cutter type.
like Batman kind of.
No, there's nothing.
Okay.
No belt or anything.
I have to agree with Greg that probably my biggest barrier to success is that I have just no interest in bragging about my work. And I'm proud of what I do, and I love the work that I do, but I feel like it's a lot more interesting to me to be making it. And I am one of those people that's mostly like in my studio with my head down, doing my thing until I come into the city and work on one of the boards that I'm on. So that's probably my biggest barrier to making it here, is that I am pretty introverted that way. And my best tool that I ever invested in is being a part of the Quality Learning New Brunswick's Story Tent program, where I learned how to use and apply choice theory, which is a William Glasser principle on how to communicate with people and how to listen to people in a more open way, like to get out of the way of youth, to use an example of what we talked about earlier. So to listen to people in a way that enables them to say whatever they need to say, so that I can listen and learn from that.
So I'll just say, working in the way I do, and working in a place like Windsor at the start of my career was, I think, difficult for the legibility of both those things as being important to, or kind of like something that other people like should be interested in, whether in terms of funding support or just kind of general, like, you know, feeling like you were doing something even when it maybe wasn't a big shiny thing that you were doing. And I'll just say that like so many of the kind of like educational things that you guys are saying about as being really valuable are certainly part of it. I'll just add that like recently I hired an assistant for the first time, and it's really been like important for a few different reasons in ways that I didn't expect. I've worked collaboratively so often, but as I was talking to John yesterday, sometimes the boundaries are fuzzy to figure out like who's doing what, and working with an assistant that you can trust, and I've mentored her in her grad school, you know, program as well. That it's like that. It's a rewarding thing, and it also is, I think, has been like insanely helpful. And I don't know how I would have like survived the last 6 months without that kind of help. So that was a good investment.
One of the big things I do find is that people are scared of art, and businesses are scared of art, and they're not. It's just because they don't know what it is, and they don't understand it. And if they can't, as we've been talking about, you know, you need the numbers. If the numbers don't line up, then there's your problem, right? And businesses are looking at the same. They look at it the same way. So we've got to educate the businesses as well as everybody else, and we have to make it accessible. And I had a show over here at the Charlotte Street Arts Center, and my family came, and I've got a brother who's hunter, fisherman, you know, the whole 9 yards, and he showed up in his camo jacket and you know, the whole thing, and I know he was uncomfortable, and and he should have been totally comfortable, and so he's got the exposure of art through me, and he's still not comfortable. Then I'm looking at that going, okay, there's something wrong here. or there has to be something else to bring those people in. And I think we have to do the same thing with business. And I think business would be willing to invest if we can talk to business, and maybe it's getting something, doing something for them, whether it's, I don't know, sculpture outside of one of their businesses, or pick a company and try to get some public sculpture up and have them support it and go in that direction. Or, there was something we talked about upriver, and it's, we were talking about having, farmers, like, upriver, it's all farms, and people have, every farmer can build anything in wood, can weld anything, can build anything, can repair any motor going. Let's have them make sculptures along the road. Let's get them in there. Then they're making a sculpture this month. 2 months from now, they're going to see a gallery show, because now art's not freaky anymore. It's just making stuff, and it's making whatever you want to make, or And so I think that's how that has to work.
So I don't have any experience really engaging with the private sector for my own art practice, but have quite a bit of experience with Third Space Gallery. A couple of years ago, we started like Art After Dark, one night only public contemporary art festival in St. John, and we actually had an amazing reaction from the private sector, and more than half of our funding came from businesses in the uptown area who really got on board very quickly with the idea that although maybe no one really understood what was going to happen because it had never happened before. So that was awesome. But also there's a huge acceptance of not, understanding the art, but still seeing the value of having people engage with it, and having artists come from across the country with a large amount of artists from St. John, actually intervene in spaces, make site-specific work, respond to the cultural landscape and historic architecture of Uptown St. John, and it was really exciting. And so because the first year was successful, and we've already talked about what does success mean, but for that event, it really, gauging the success felt pretty easy, in that there were people out on the street experiencing the art projects who maybe felt a barrier, which you were talking about in your answer, to going into a traditional gallery space, because those barriers do exist, and socioeconomic barriers. And Third Space Gallery works as a siteless artist-run center. Just for anyone who doesn't know, we don't have a permanent gallery space, so all of our projects happen, and we're constantly asking questions about community and what we're doing there, and about exchange, and so I guess just to wrap up my answer to that question, something that I've taken from that positive reaction to asking the private sector for funding is just that it's really important to trust your audience and trust your community and your public, the people around you. Just trust them, and people are very generous, and we've really found that over the last couple of years with Third Space Gallery. So.
I talked to you about how I value volunteering for other organizations, and the knowledge that I gained from working with some very clever people. And my job as a violinist is basically similar to a plumber, carpenter. I'm paid to do certain services. So I come and play at your wedding, I get paid. I play in the symphony, I get paid. the only smart thing is to make some CDs so that you don't actually have to work to earn money. So that, but I haven't really figured that one out yet. We sold a few, but it's taken a long time. But the other thing that I think is important and has been very rewarding for me is the idea of giving, in a way, giving back to the community. So if we're asked to do a fundraiser, we do a number of fundraisers every year for no fee, like the AIDS Society and a number of other organizations that put on concerts to raise money for their causes. But more important than that is the educational outreach activities that we do. And we go into 50 schools every year and we play a program that we devise that's educational and we were able to demonstrate. And what that does for us really is it helps us connect with the community, and it helps demystify what we do as classical musicians, because I don't even dress like this. I dress in jeans and a shirt, and you know, over 10,000 kids a year get to see classical musicians come and talk to them and play for them. So it takes away that what you were talking about, that fear of actually going to a cultural event, because they see us just as normal people and we talk to them and they see us, you know, we're not in tuxes or anything like that. That helps us connect with the community. And I hear many times where someone who is now an adult, come up to me and said, you know, when you came and played in my grade 5 class, that inspired me to become this or that. And quite often they become in music, or they become music administrators, or they can become music teachers in the school system. So it does make an effect, and it's both rewarding for us as a group, because, you know, that's 50 concerts a year that we develop and play, and that's our passion, and it's an income stream as well. But it also helps us really connect with our community, so it widens our presence in the community. One of the most rewarding things that when I look back for myself is you know, collaborating, volunteering for organizations, seeing how other people do things. It's a great school out there, and I certainly wouldn't be able to be doing the things that I do today without that happening. So, and I'm going to leave you too now.
I would just expand a little bit on that, and also encourage collaboration and seek collaboration, or be open to it in unexpected forms and places, and with other artists, other organizations, businesses. I mean, it could come from anywhere, and you just have to be open and ready to accept it, and if you want to. and also, I guess some advice would be to leave the province every once in a while, whether it's through a residency, or just to, you know, go to Quebec for a little bit, or even just to leave your city, let's say like Fredericton, and go to St. John or Moncton, and then always come back.
Continue to do what you love, and you know, eventually you won't be able to do it anymore. So, you know, until that time comes, keep at it.
I'm not one to summarize, so I guess I could say, to me, it's just most important to respond to the call. Like, whether it's the call of your community or the call of your work, just pick up the call. Look at the bat signal, whatever.
So I have like a really quick one, and then just a tiny story. So the first one is, I think if you have power, then you got to figure out how to give some of it up. And if you don't have power, then you got to find ways to keep asking for it and demanding it. And the second one is a story I'll relay from the artist Jonathan Hieswick, who is a kind of very long-term social practice artist. And she once told me, when I asked her for advice, she's like, well, you need to be preoccupied. And she's from the Netherlands, and so this was a kind of nice translation in a way, because I think she meant that when you go into a situation or any time you're approaching a project, you need to bring with it a concern that, you know, that will kind of be your sort of guiding post about the decisions you make and how you work and how you operate. And that preoccupation is not a distraction, it's actually something that is supposed to arc over a longer term of time than any one kind of momentary investment or project or something. So I've kind of always held that with me, and it seems like a good thing to remember.